Welcome to this profoundly tedious exploration of historical beliefs about magic and medicine. We will proceed with deliberate slowness through centuries of misguided theories, examining in exhaustive detail the various incorrect ideas that humanity held about healing, supernatural forces, and the workings of the human body. Prepare yourself for a journey into boredom so comprehensive that sleep will seem like a merciful release from this relentless catalogue of outdated misconceptions. Chapter 1. The Theory of Four Humours. Let us begin with one of the most persistent and thoroughly incorrect medical theories in human history, the doctrine of the four humours. This theory, developed by ancient Greek physicians and perpetuated for more than 2,000 years, held that the human body contained four fundamental fluids, and that health depended on maintaining these fluids in proper balance. The four humours were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each humour was associated with specific qualities. Blood was hot and wet, phlegm was cold and wet, yellow bile was hot and dry, black bile was cold and dry. These associations with hot, cold, wet and dry connected the humours to broader philosophical ideas about the fundamental qualities of all matter, derived from even earlier Greek philosophical traditions. The theory further held that each humour was associated with specific organs and with specific seasons. Blood was produced by the liver and was associated with spring. Phlegm was produced by the brain and lungs and was associated with winter. Yellow bile came from the gallbladder and was associated with summer. Black bile came from the spleen and was associated with autumn. These associations created an elaborate system connecting the human body to the natural world and the passage of seasons. Each person was thought to have a natural temperament determined by which humour predominated in their body. A sanguine temperament dominated by blood made a person cheerful, optimistic, and sociable. A phlegmatic temperament, dominated by phlegm, made a person calm, sluggish, and unemotional. A choleric temperament, dominated by yellow bile, made a person quick-tempered, ambitious, and energetic. A melancholic temperament, dominated by black bile, made a person sad, thoughtful, and prone to depression. Disease, according to this theory, resulted from imbalance among the humours. If one humour became excessive or deficient relative to the others, illness would result. The specific symptoms of the illness would depend on which humour was out of balance. An excess of blood might cause fever and inflammation. Too much phlegm might cause colds and respiratory problems. Excess yellow bile might cause digestive issues and irritability. Too much black bile might cause depression and various chronic ailments. Treatment, therefore, involved restoring balance among the humours. This could be accomplished through various means. Bloodletting, the intentional removal of blood from the body, was used to reduce an excess of the blood humour. This was done by cutting a vein and allowing blood to flow out into a bowl, or by applying leeches that would suck blood through the skin. The amount of blood removed would be estimated by the physician based on his assessment of the patient's condition. The process of bloodletting was remarkably straightforward in practice. The physician would select a vein, typically in the arm, and would use a small blade called a lancet to cut into the vein. Blood would flow from the cut. The patient would sit or lie still while this occurred, perhaps holding a bowl to catch the blood. The physician would watch the blood flow. judging when enough had been removed. Then the cut would be bandaged to stop the bleeding. The patient would be advised to rest, as the loss of blood would cause temporary weakness. Purging, inducing vomiting or diarrhea, was used to eliminate excess bile humours. Various substances would be administered that would irritate the digestive system, causing the body to expel stomach contents or bowel contents. The substances used included plant extracts that had emetic or laxative properties. The patient would drink the prescribed mixture and would then experience the expected effects, vomiting or bowel movements, which were considered therapeutic rather than merely unpleasant symptoms of poisoning. Dietary modifications were another method of balancing humours. Different foods were classified according to their qualities, hot or cold, wet or dry, and their effects on humours. A patient with excess cold, wet phlegm might be advised to eat hot, dry foods to counterbalance. These foods might include spices, which were considered hot, or roasted meats, which were dry. Conversely, a patient with excess hot, dry yellow bile might be advised to eat cool, moist foods like cucumbers or fish prepared with minimal seasoning. The theory was elaborated in immense detail by generations of physicians. Entire books were written cataloguing which foods affected which humours, which herbs had which qualities, which treatments were appropriate for which imbalances. The Glennick medical texts, written by the Roman physician Galen in the 2nd century CE, and studied for more than 1,000 years afterward, filled volumes with discussions of humoral theory and its applications. The persistence of this theory, despite its complete incorrectness, is noteworthy. For centuries, physicians trained in humoral medicine. They learned to diagnose by examining the balance of humours. They prescribed treatments based on theoretical understanding of how to restore balance. Patients accepted these explanations and submitted to treatments that range from ineffective to actively harmful. The theory was so well established, so thoroughly integrated into medical education and practice, that questioning it was considered ignorant or heretical. The decline of humoral theory came only gradually. A scientific investigation revealed the actual workings of the body. The discovery of blood circulation by William Harvey in the 17th century contradicted humoral ideas about blood. The development of pathology, the study of disease at the tissue and cellular level, in the 18th and 19th centuries showed that disease had specific causes unrelated to humoral balance. The germ theory of disease developed in the 19th century provided an entirely different explanation for infectious illnesses. Yet even as these discoveries accumulated, humoral theory retained adherents who tried to reconcile new findings with traditional frameworks. The terminology of humoral theory persists in modern language even though the theory itself is dead. We still describe people as sanguine, phlegmatic, choleric, or melancholic, though we no longer believe these temperaments result from bodily fluids. We speak of someone being in good humour or bad humour, a phrase that originally referred to humoral balance. These linguistic fossils are reminders of how thoroughly humoral thinking once dominated Western medicine. Chapter 2. The Doctrine of Signatures. Another persistent belief about how medicine worked was the doctrine of signatures. This theory held that plants and other natural substances bore physical signs, signatures, indicating their medicinal uses. By examining the appearance of a plant, one could determine what ailments it would cure. This belief rested on the assumption that God or nature had provided these signs to guide humans in finding remedies. The most straightforward version of the doctrine held that plants resembling specific body parts would cure ailments of those parts. A walnut, which resembles a brain with its convoluted surface, was believed to cure headaches and mental disorders. Kidney beans, shaped like kidneys, were thought to treat kidney ailments. Eyebright, a plant with flowers that some thought resembled eyes, was used for eye problems. The yellow sap of greater celandine, resembling bile, was used for liver and gallbladder conditions. The reasoning behind this doctrine was theological and philosophical rather than empirical. The belief was that a benevolent creator would not leave humanity without guidance in treating disease. Since plants provided remedies, and since not everyone could learn medicine from teachers, there must be signs in nature itself that revealed which plants had which uses. These signs were the signatures that the observant could read. Colour was another form of signature. Red plants or plant parts resembling blood were used to treat blood disorders or wounds. Yellow plants were used for jaundice and liver problems, as jaundice causes yellowing of the skin. White flowers were used for leukorrhea and other conditions involving white discharges. The logic was that like cured like, or at least that similar appearances indicated similar natures and thus therapeutic relationships. The texture and behavior of plants also provided signatures. Plants that grew in wet conditions were thought to cure conditions involving excess moisture. Plants that exuded sticky sap were used for conditions where tissues needed to be joined or held together. Plants that grew quickly and vigorously were thought to promote growth and vitality when used as medicine. Conversely, plants that grew slowly or in poor soil were thought to treat wasting diseases. The elaboration of signature theory became quite complex. A single plant might have multiple signatures indicating multiple uses. The appearance of leaves, flowers, roots, and stems could all provide different signs. The colour, shape, texture, smell, and taste all contributed information about therapeutic properties. Learned herbalists would compile detailed descriptions of signatures and their interpretations, creating guides that purported to unlock nature's medical wisdom. Preparation of medicines based on signature theory involved careful attention to preserving or enhancing the signature. If a plant's red colour was the key to its blood-healing properties, then preparation methods that preserved the red colour were preferred. If a plant's shape was the signature, then the plant might be dried whole rather than crushed to maintain the significant form. If sap was the signature, then extracts that preserved the sap's properties would be used. The timing of harvest was also considered significant. Some practitioners believed that signatures were strongest at certain times, during particular phases of the moon, at specific times of day, during certain seasons. Harvesting at the optimal time would yield medicine with maximum potency. This added another layer of complexity to an already elaborate system of belief and practice. The administration of signature-based medicines followed principles derived from the signature itself. If treating a head ailment with walnut, the medicine might be applied to the head, or consumed in a way thought to direct it to the head. If treating kidneys with kidney beans, they would be prepared in ways that supposedly enhanced their kidney-specific effects. The entire process, From identifying signatures to harvesting to preparation to administration, was guided by the signature doctrine. The doctrine of signatures was not limited to plants. Minerals and animal parts were also thought to bear signatures. A yellow mineral might treat jaundice. A stone with holes might treat bladder stones. Animal parts resembling human organs were thought to strengthen those organs. Eating heart would strengthen the heart, consuming brain would enhance mental function, and so on. This extended the principle across all of nature. Criticism of the doctrine of signatures existed even during periods when it was widely accepted. Some physicians and natural philosophers pointed out that the resemblances were often vague or required imagination to perceive. They noted that different people saw different signatures in the same plant, suggesting subjectivity rather than objective signs. They observed that many effective medicines bore no obvious signature relating to their uses. However, these criticisms had limited impact during the doctrine's heyday. The theological arguments were persuasive to people who believed in divine providence. The philosophical framework seemed coherent and elegant. The practical results were mixed enough. Some signature-based remedies helped. Many did nothing. Some harmed. That the theory could claim some support from experience while explaining failures as misinterpretation of signatures or improper preparation. The decline of signature doctrine paralleled the rise of empirical medicine and chemistry. As physicians began testing remedies systematically, and as chemists began isolating active compounds from plants, it became clear that therapeutic effects had nothing to do with appearances. A plant's shape was irrelevant to its chemical constituents. Color indicated pigments, not medicinal properties. The actual reasons why some plants helped some conditions involved complex chemistry that bore no relationship to signatures. Yet elements of signature thinking persist in folk medicine and alternative medicine traditions. The idea that like cures, like appears in homeopathy. The belief that natural products contain signs of their uses persists in various forms. While mainstream medicine has abandoned signature doctrine, it continues to appeal to those seeking simple principles to understand the complex relationship between natural substances and human health. Chapter 3: Astrological Medicine. The integration of astrology with medicine was another major component of historical medical theory. Physicians believed that celestial bodies, the sun, moon, planets, and stars, influenced human health, and that understanding these influences was essential for effective medical practice. This belief system connected individual human bodies to the vast cosmos through chains of correspondence and influence. The foundational idea was that the universe was a unified whole, with connections between all its parts. The macrocosm of the heavens was reflected in the microcosm of the human body. Each planet governed specific organs and body parts. Each zodiac sign ruled particular regions of the body. The positions and movements of celestial bodies affected the flow of humours, the vitality of organs, and the likelihood of disease or recovery. The planets had specific medical associations that physicians memorized. The sun governed the heart and influenced vitality and strength. The moon governed the brain and affected fluids, moods, and women's reproductive cycles. Mercury ruled the mind, nerves, and speech organs. Venus governed the kidneys, reproductive organs, and skin. Mars ruled the blood, muscles, and external genitalia. Jupiter governed the liver, growth, and general health. Saturn ruled the spleen, bones, and teeth. The zodiac signs were similarly assigned body parts. Aries governed the head and face. Taurus ruled the neck and throat. Gemini controlled the arms, hands, and lungs. Cancer ruled the chest and stomach. Leo governed the heart and back. Virgo controlled the intestines. Libra ruled the kidneys and lower back. Scorpio governed the reproductive and excretory organs. Sagittarius controlled the hips and thighs. Capricorn ruled the knees and joints. Aquarius governed the legs and ankles. Pisces controlled the feet. These associations meant that the zodiac sign rising at the time of an illness, or the signs through which planets were moving, would affect the course and treatment of disease. A heart condition would be influenced by the sun's position and by celestial configurations in Leo. Digestive problems would be affected by Cancer and by the moon. Mental disturbances would relate to Mercury and to Gemini. The physician needed to cast a horoscope for the moment of illness or for the patient's birth to understand these influences. The moon's phases were considered particularly important for medical practice. The waxing moon, growing from new to full, was thought to be a time when the body was in a building, strengthening phase. Treatments that added to the body, nourishing foods, restorative herbs, were more effective during the waxing moon. The waning moon, shrinking from full to new, was a time of depletion. Treatments that removed from the body, bloodletting, purging, surgery, were more effective during the waning moon. The moon's position in the zodiac affected which body parts were most vulnerable or responsive to treatment. When the moon was in Aries, the head was sensitive and treatments or surgeries involving the head should be avoided or approached with caution. When the moon was in Taurus, the throat and neck were vulnerable. Physicians would consult almanacs showing the moon's daily position to plan treatments optimally. Critical days in illness were determined astrologically. Certain days after the onset of illness were judged critical based on lunar phases and planetary positions. On these critical days, the disease would reach a turning point, either toward recovery or toward worsening. The physician would watch for these critical days, as they would reveal whether treatments were working and what the prognosis was. The timing of these critical days was calculated using complex astrological rules. Bloodletting, as a common medical procedure, was thoroughly integrated with astrological principles. The best time for bloodletting was during the waning moon, when the body's fluids were thought to be receding. The worst time was during the waxing moon, when fluids were increasing. The zodiac sign of the moon also mattered. Bloodletting should avoid times when the moon was in signs governing vital organs or the specific area from which blood would be drawn. Almanacs published for physicians included calendars showing favourable and unfavourable days for bleeding. The preparation and administration of medicines were also timed astrologically. Herbs should be gathered when the moon was in favourable signs, and when planetary configurations supported the herb's particular properties. Medicines should be compounded when celestial influences were harmonious. Administration of medicines should occur at times when the relevant planets and signs were well positioned. This attention to timing was believed to maximize therapeutic effects. Astrological diagnosis involved casting a horoscope for the moment when the patient first became ill or first consulted the physician. This horoscope would reveal the nature of the illness, its probable course, and the appropriate treatments. The positions of planets, their aspects to each other, and their relationships to the zodiac signs all provided information. A skilled physician astrologer could read these celestial indicators as readily as examining the patient's body. Prognosis, predicting whether the patient would recover, was heavily astrological. The positions and movements of celestial bodies indicated the likely outcome. Favourable configurations suggested recovery. Difficult aspects between planets, especially involving Saturn or Mars, suggested danger. The movement of the Moon and its aspects to other planets was scrutinized for signs of crisis or improvement. Some configurations indicated death, and the physician could warn the family to prepare. The integration of astrology and medicine was so thorough that medical education included substantial astrological training. A physician needed to understand celestial mechanics, the calculation of planetary positions, the interpretation of horoscopes, and the application of astrological principles to diagnosis and treatment. Many medical texts included astrological sections. Some texts were entirely devoted to astrological medicine, detailing the intricate connections between celestial phenomena and bodily health. Criticism of astrological medicine existed but was muted during the medieval and early modern periods, when this practice was at its height. Some skeptics questioned whether distant planets could actually influence individual human bodies. Others pointed out that astrological predictions often failed or were so vague as to be unfalsifiable. However, these criticisms competed against the massive weight of traditional belief. The integration of astrology into broader philosophical frameworks and the personal investment of physicians in astrological practice. The decline of astrological medicine came with the scientific revolution's new understanding of astronomy and physics. The realization that planets were physical objects governed by gravity and mechanics, not bearers of mystical influences, undermined astrological theory. The development of effective treatments based on chemistry and biology rather than celestial timing showed that astrological considerations were unnecessary. Yet astrological medicine persisted in some circles well into the 18th century and continues in marginal forms today. Chapter 4: Sympathetic Magic and Transference. Another category of beliefs about how healing worked involved sympathetic magic, the idea that things that had once been connected remained connected even after physical separation, and that similar things influenced each other across distances. These principles were applied to medicine in ways that seemed logical within their theoretical framework, but were entirely ineffective in practice. The principle of contagion held that objects that had been in contact would continue to influence each other. A piece of clothing worn by a sick person retained a connection to the person. Medicine applied to the clothing could affect the person, even if they were no longer wearing it. Similarly, items that had touched a wound remained connected to that wound. Treating the item would help heal the wound through this sympathetic connection. The principle of similarity held that things resembling each other had mystical connections. An image or model of a person could be used to affect that person. Objects shaped like body parts or afflictions could be used to treat them. This principle underlay much of the doctrine of signatures, but extended beyond it to include deliberately created representations. The weapon salve tradition exemplified sympathetic magic in medicine. If someone was wounded by a weapon, a sword, a knife, an arrow, the weapon rather than the wound could be treated. The weapon would be cleaned, anointed with healing salve, and kept in favourable conditions. Through sympathetic connection, the wound would heal. The actual wound might receive minimal or no treatment, with all therapeutic effort directed at the weapon that caused it. The rationale for weapon salve was that the weapon and wound remained connected through the blood and tissue that had adhered to the weapon. Keeping the weapon clean prevented the wound from becoming infected. Keeping it warm prevented fever. Applying healing salves to the weapon transmitted healing virtue to the wound. This explanation seemed coherent within a framework that accepted sympathetic connections as real. Transference was another related principle. Disease could be transferred from a person to an object, plant, or animal. Various rituals accomplished this transfer. A common method involved rubbing a wart with a piece of meat, then burying the meat. As the meat decayed, the wart would disappear. The wart had been transferred to the meat through the contact, and the decay of the meat destroyed the wart. Plants could receive transferred illness. A person with a fever might be told to tie a thread around a tree while stating that they were giving the fever to the tree. The fever would leave the person and afflict the tree. Instead, the person would recover, and the tree might show signs of stress, yellowing leaves, damaged bark, indicating that it had taken on the illness. This transferred illness would gradually dissipate, absorbed into the tree and neutralized by its vitality. Animals could also receive transferred disease. Touching an afflicted body part to an animal could transfer the affliction. The animal would sicken while the person recovered. This was considered acceptable because animal life was valued less than human life. A pig might be allowed to sicken and die if this saved a human from illness. The belief was that disease was a discrete entity that could be moved between bodies rather than a malfunction of bodily processes. Written words could serve as vehicles for transference. An incantation or prayer written on parchment could absorb illness if the parchment was placed on the affected body part. The parchment would then be burned, buried, or thrown into flowing water. The illness transferred to the writing would be destroyed or carried away. This combined sympathetic magic with the power attributed to written language and religious formulae. The hair and nail clippings of a person retained connection to that person. Medicine applied to someone's hair could affect their health. Conversely, if someone obtained another person's hair or nail clippings and treated them badly, burning them, burying them with cursing rituals, they could harm that person. This belief created anxiety about hair and nail disposal. People would burn their clippings or bury them carefully to prevent them from being used against them. Blood had particularly strong sympathetic connections. Blood from a person could be used in rituals affecting that person's health. Drawing blood and treating it with healing herbs was thought to purify the person's entire blood supply through sympathetic connection. Conversely, blood could be used in harmful magic, so bloodstains were carefully cleaned and disposed of, and bloodletting implements were cleaned thoroughly to prevent ill-intentioned people from accessing blood. The morning dew, especially collected at specific times like May Day, was thought to absorb the healing power of the sun and air. Bathing in or drinking May dew was believed to cure various ailments. The dew collected the healing virtues of the earth, plants, and atmosphere as it condensed. These virtues were transferred to the person who used the dew, healing their afflictions through this sympathetic transfer of natural virtue. Touching relics of saints was believed to transfer healing power. The bones, clothing, or possessions of holy persons retained connection to those persons and to divine power that had worked through them. A sick person touching a relic could receive healing through this connection. Pilgrimages to relic sites were undertaken specifically for healing. The faithful believed that proximity to these holy objects allowed divine healing power to transfer to them. Royal or touch was another example of sympathetic transfer. The touch of a legitimate monarch was believed to cure certain diseases, particularly scrofula, a form of tuberculosis affecting the lymph nodes. The king's divine appointment gave him healing power that could be transferred through touch. Elaborate ceremonies were developed where sick people would be brought before the monarch to receive the royal touch and supposedly healing. The persistence of sympathetic magic in medicine reflected broader beliefs about the interconnectedness of all things and the power of invisible influences. In a worldview where spiritual forces, divine providence, and mystical connections were accepted as real, sympathetic magic made perfect sense. It provided explanations for mysterious correlations and offered hope for cures when direct medical intervention seemed ineffective. The decline of sympathetic magic came as mechanical philosophy and empirical science provided alternative explanations for natural phenomena. The idea that the universe operated through mechanical cause and effect rather than sympathetic connections gained ground. Careful testing showed that sympathetic treatments had no effects beyond placebo. The theoretical framework supporting sympathetic magic collapsed as its metaphysical foundations were rejected. Yet sympathetic thinking persists in various forms. The folk belief that you can curse someone with their photograph reflects contagion and similarity principles. Alternative medicine practices that claim to treat the body by treating something separate from it echo sympathetic magic. The psychological appeal of sympathetic connections, the idea that separated things remain linked, continues to attract belief despite scientific refutation. Chapter 5. The Power of Words and Incantations. Throughout history, people believed that spoken or written words possessed inherent power to cause healing or harm. This belief manifested in complex systems of incantations, charms, prayers, and written talismans that were integral to medical practice. The words themselves were thought to be active agents, not merely descriptions or requests. Healing incantations would be spoken over the sick person or over medicine being prepared. The specific words mattered. They needed to be exact, following traditional formulae that had been proven effective through long use. Changing even one word might invalidate the charm. The pronunciation was important, with emphasis placed on certain syllables. The tone of voice could affect potency. Some charms needed to be whispered, others spoken loudly, others chanted rhythmically. Latin was particularly powerful in European medical incantations because it was the language of the church and of learning. Even people who spoke no Latin would memorize Latin phrases for healing charms. The incomprehensibility of the words to the speaker or patient was actually an advantage. The mysterious foreign sounds seemed more powerful than ordinary language. The Latin connected the healing charm to ecclesiastical authority and ancient wisdom. Some incantations were prayers invoking God, saints, or angels to grant healing. These were considered particularly powerful because they called on divine intervention. The prayer might ask for general healing or might be specific to particular ailments. Saint-specific prayers addressed saints who were believed to specialize in certain conditions. Saint Apollonia for toothaches, Saint Lucy for eye problems, Saint Agatha for breast diseases, and so on. Other incantations were not prayers, but seemed to be magical formulae with obscure origins. They might consist of nonsense syllables, corrupted words from ancient languages, or mysterious names. The logic was that the power resided in the sounds themselves rather than in comprehensible meaning. Speaking these sounds activated forces that would cause healing. The incomprehensible nature meant the words were not requests or descriptions, but were active causes of change. Written charms were as important as spoken ones. Words written on parchment and worn as amulets provided continuous protection or healing. The writing might be prayers, biblical verses, magical symbols, or collections of letters arranged in specific patterns. The parchment would be folded, placed in a small bag or container, and worn around the neck or attached to clothing. Some would be sewn into clothing itself. The act of writing the charm had to be done correctly. Specific inks might be required. Some charms needed to be written in red ink, others in black. The timing of writing mattered. Certain charms should be written during particular moon phases or on specific saints' days. The person writing needed to be in proper spiritual condition, perhaps fasting or having recently confessed. Mistakes in writing invalidated the charm and required starting over with fresh parchment. Sator squares were a common form of written charm. This was a word square that read the same forwards, backwards, and up and down. Sator, Aripo, Tenet, Opera, Rotas. The meaning of these words was unclear. They might be Latin words or might be corrupted forms, but the palindromic structure was believed to give the square power. Written on parchment and carried, it would protect against disease, fire, and various misfortunes. Different traditions assigned different powers to the Sator square, but its use was widespread across Europe for centuries. Abracadabra was another famous healing charm. The word would be written in a triangular pattern, with one letter removed in each successive line. Abracadabra, abracadabra, abracadab, abracada, abracad, abraca, abrac, abra, ab. This diminishing pattern was believed to cause the disease to diminish as well. The written charm would be worn as an amulet, and as the word shrank away to nothing, the illness would also disappear. The origin of the word abracadabra was obscure, which contributed to its mystical power. Names of God were particularly powerful in healing charms. In Jewish mystical tradition, various names of God, particularly the tetragrammaton, the four-letter name, and its permutations, were used in healing. Christian tradition used the names Jesus, Mary, and the Trinity. Islamic tradition used the 99 names of Allah. Writing these names and carrying them or speaking them in healing rituals was believed to invoke divine power directly. Acronyms and abbreviations had magical power. The letters IHS, representing Jesus' name in Greek, appeared in many Christian healing charms. INRI, from the inscription on Christ's cross, was used. These abbreviated names were easier to incorporate into amulets and inscriptions while retaining full spiritual power. The compression of divine names into abbreviated forms was believed to concentrate their power. Numbers combined with words created powerful healing formulae. Certain prayers needed to be repeated specific numbers of times, 3 times, 7 times, 9 times. The number itself had power. 3 was the Trinity, 7 was sacred in biblical tradition, 9 was 3 times 3, a particularly potent number. The repetition reinforced the charm's power, with each recitation adding to the total effect. Charms could be used preventatively or curatively. A charm worn continuously might prevent illness from occurring. The same charm applied when illness struck might cure it. Some charms were specific to particular diseases: plague charms, fever charms, wound charms. Others were general protections against all illness and harm. The more powerful the charm, the broader its protective scope. Transmission of charms was sometimes restricted. Powerful charms might be family secrets, passed from one generation to another with strict instructions never to write them down or share them outside the family. Some charms were said to lose power if revealed too freely. Others needed to be shared to maintain potency. Taught to apprentices, spoken over the sick, written and distributed widely. The intersection of medicine and religion made distinguishing between prayer and magical incantation difficult. Church authorities struggled with this issue. Prayers to God and saints were acceptable. Mysterious formulae with unclear origins were potentially demonic magic. But the boundary was fuzzy. Some approved charms contained elements that seemed magical. Some condemned practices were modifications of approved prayers. The Protestant Reformation affected healing charms significantly. Reformers rejected many Catholic healing practices as superstitious. Prayers to saints, blessings of objects, holy water, relics. However, Protestant traditions developed their own healing charms, often centered on direct invocation of God and Christ, and on biblical verses worn or recited. The rejection of Catholic charms did not eliminate belief in word power, but redirected it. The decline of belief in the inherent power of words came with the Enlightenment's emphasis on rational, mechanical explanations. Words were recognized as conventional signs with meanings agreed upon by language communities, not as bearers of intrinsic power. Prayer became understood as request rather than causal force. Charms were dismissed as superstition. Medical effectiveness was sought through physical remedies rather than verbal formulae. Yet the psychological power of words, the placebo effect of comforting rituals, the reassurance of traditional practices, the focus of attention that incantations provide, continues to influence healing. While modern medicine rejects word power as superstition, it acknowledges that patient belief and expectation affect outcomes. The ancient intuition that words matter in healing was not entirely wrong, even if the mechanism was misunderstood. Chapter 6: Amulets and Protective Objects. Beyond spoken and written words, people believed that physical objects possessed protective and healing powers. These amulets, talismans, and charms were carried, worn, or placed in homes to prevent illness and provide healing. The variety of objects used and the beliefs surrounding them reveal the complexity of pre-scientific medical understanding. Gemstones were believed to have specific healing properties based on their colors, compositions, and astrological associations. Amethyst prevented drunkenness and protected against poison. Bloodstone stopped bleeding and promoted blood health. Coral protected children from harm. Emerald improved eyesight and protected against epilepsy. Jade promoted kidney health. Sapphire cured eye diseases and protected against fraud. Each stone had its traditional uses, passed down through lapidaries, books that catalogued gemstone properties. The gemstone would be worn touching the skin, set in rings, worn in necklaces, or sewn into clothing. The physical contact allowed the stone's virtues to transfer to the wearer. Some traditions held that the stone needed to be given as a gift to work properly. A purchased stone was less effective. Others believed stones inherited by family members were particularly powerful, having absorbed the virtue of previous owners. The preparation of gemstone amulets sometimes involved elaborate rituals. The stone might be carved with specific symbols at specific times. Astrologically favourable moments would be chosen for setting the stone. Prayers or incantations would be recited during preparation. These procedures were believed to enhance or activate the stone's natural powers, making it more effective as a protective and healing object. Metals had protective and healing properties. Gold was associated with the sun and with heart health. Silver was lunar, protecting against evil and promoting purity. Copper helped with skin conditions and joint pain. Iron protected against fairies and malevolent spirits, who supposedly could not tolerate iron. Lead was saturnine, used despite its toxicity in various medicinal preparations. Wearing metal objects provided continuous protection and healing. Combinations of gemstones and metals created particularly powerful amulets. A bloodstone set in silver would combine the stone's anti-bleeding properties with silver's purifying virtue. An emerald in gold would unite eye-healing power with the heart-strengthening quality of gold. The astrological associations of stone and metal could be coordinated. A solar stone in gold doubled solar influences, while a lunar stone in silver enhanced lunar effects. Animal parts were used as amulets based on the supposed properties of the animals. Rabbits' feet supposedly brought luck and protection. Mole feet cured toothaches when worn around the neck. Wolf teeth protected against nightmares. Snake skin shed naturally was protective, as the snake's ability to renew itself by shedding was transferred to the wearer. Bear claws gave the wearer the bear's strength and courage. The heart of a swallow, dried and worn in a leather bag, cured melancholy. Powder made from the ground horn of a rhinoceros or unicorn, actually narwhal tusk, counteracted poison. Eagle stones, hollow stones containing loose material inside, protected pregnant women and ensured safe childbirth. The logic was that the animal's distinctive characteristics could be transferred to humans through carrying or wearing parts of the animal. Plant materials served as amulets. Four-leaf clovers brought general good fortune and protection. Rowan berries protected against witchcraft. Vervain prevented fevers when worn. Mugwort prevented fatigue when carried by travellers. Garlic hung in homes protected against plague and vampires. These plants were believed to embody protective virtues that remained active even when the plant was dried or dead. Ash from specific fires had protective properties. Ash from the midsummer bonfire, collected and kept, protected the home from lightning and evil. Ash from the Easter candle, blessed in church, protected against storms and sickness. These ashes would be mixed with water to create a protective wash, or would be scattered around property boundaries to create a protective barrier. Bread blessed in church became a protective object. The blessed bread, particularly from Easter or Christmas services, was kept throughout the year. Crumbs would be fed to sick livestock to cure them. Pieces would be carried when travelling for protection. Bread from certain miraculous occasions, hosts that supposedly bled, loaves multiplied miraculously, were especially powerful and became relics in their own right. Holy water from churches was essential for protection and healing. Water blessed by a priest acquired power to repel evil and promote health. It would be used to bless homes, sprinkled on the sick, added to drinking water for healing. Some people kept bottles of holy water from particularly sacred sites. Lourdes, Jerusalem, sacred springs, believing that water from these locations was especially powerful. Horseshoes nailed above doorways protected homes from bad luck and evil spirits. The iron of the horseshoe repelled malevolent forces. The U-shape was said to catch and hold good luck. Keeping the horseshoe with the opening upward prevented the luck from running out. This protection extended to health. A home protected from evil influences would also be protected from disease. Mandrake root, with its roughly human shape, was one of the most prized amulets. The root was dangerous to harvest. Tradition held that it screamed when pulled from the ground, and that the scream could kill the harvester. Methods were developed to harvest it safely, using dogs to pull the root while the harvester stood at a distance. Once obtained, mandrake was believed to bring wealth, protection, and healing power. The hand of glory was a particularly gruesome protective object. This was the severed hand of a hanged criminal, prepared through a complex process of pickling and drying. When held by a criminal, it supposedly made people in the house sleep so deeply they could not wake, allowing the criminal to burgle freely. The protective aspect came from hanging a hand of glory in one's own home. The presence of this object would protect against theft and evil. Naturally hold stones, stones with holes worn through them by water or natural processes, were powerful amulets. Called hag stones or witch stones, they were hung in barns to protect livestock, worn around the neck for personal protection, or hung in homes to prevent evil spirits from entering. Looking through the holes supposedly allowed seeing fairies and spirits, giving the wearer power over them. Birth calls, the amniotic membrane that sometimes remains on a baby's head at birth, were considered extremely lucky. A child born with a caul would have good fortune and protection from drowning. The dried caul would be kept as a family treasure and sometimes sold, as sailors believed carrying a caul protected them from shipwreck. The caul's protective power was so valued that advertisements for cauls appeared in newspapers into the 19th century. Coins bent through supernatural means or found in unusual circumstances became amulets. A coin with a hole could be worn on a string. A silver coin that passed through the hands of 9 generations gave protection. Coins from specific years or bearing specific marks had special powers. The material value of the coin was less important than its unusual history or characteristics. Dead man's hand, cards held by a person when they died, were considered lucky amulets for gamblers. The belief was that death at that moment marked those cards with special power. Similarly, a rope from a hanging was considered lucky, particularly if obtained directly from the gallows. These objects brushed by death were thought to absorb power from that brush with mortality. The accumulation of multiple amulets was common. A person might wear several amulets simultaneously: a gemstone ring, a metal chain with pendant, a leather bag of herbs, a holy medal, each providing specific protection or benefit. The effects were thought to be cumulative. More amulets meant more protection. Some people became laden with protective objects, wearing multiple items at all times. Chapter 7: Bloodletting and Humoral Balancing Practices. Returning to the four humours theory, we must examine in greater detail the specific practices used to balance humours, as these dominated medical treatment for centuries. Bloodletting, already mentioned, was the most prominent intervention, but the methods, reasoning, and variations deserve exhaustive description. The basic tools of bloodletting were simple but required skill to use. The lancet was a small blade, usually folding like a pocket knife. The blade was sharp and narrow, designed to pierce veins cleanly. The fleam was a more complex tool with multiple blades of different sizes that could be selected based on the vein to be opened and the amount of blood to be released. The spring-loaded lancet, developed later, automated the cutting motion to ensure consistent depth and speed of cut. The choice of vein for bloodletting depended on the location of illness. Blood should be removed from a vein near the affected area to draw off the diseased humour most efficiently. Headache might be treated by opening a vein in the temple or behind the ear. Liver disease might prompt bleeding from a vein in the right arm. Lung ailments might require bleeding from the left arm. Complex rules governed these choices, derived from humoral theory and astrological considerations. The median cubital vein in the inner elbow was the most common site for bloodletting because it was easily accessible and relatively large. The patient would sit with arm extended and hand opened. A ligature would be tied around the upper arm to make the vein prominent. The physician would palpate the vein to confirm its location and assess its size. Then the vein would be cut with the lancet, creating an opening through which blood would flow. The patient would hold a bowl or basin positioned under the arm to catch the blood. The blood would flow steadily, gravity and the pressure from the ligature ensuring continuous flow. The physician would watch the blood accumulate, judging when sufficient had been removed. The amount varied based on the patient's condition, age, and constitution. A young, strong patient might lose a pint or more. An older or weaker patient might have only a few ounces removed. The appearance of the blood provided diagnostic information. Thick, dark blood indicated an excess of black bile. Thin, bright red blood suggested too much blood humour. Observation of the blood as it settled in the bowl revealed further signs. A yellowish layer separating out indicated yellow bile. The texture and coagulation pattern provided information about the patient's humoral balance. When sufficient blood had been removed, the ligature would be released and the cut would be bandaged. A cloth pad would be placed over the cut and bound tightly with a bandage wrapped around the arm. The patient would be advised to rest, as the blood loss would cause temporary weakness and dizziness. Food and drink would be offered to restore strength. The bandage would remain in place for hours or days until the physician was confident the cut had closed. Complications from bloodletting were common but rarely acknowledged as problematic by practitioners. Excessive bleeding could occur if the cut was too large or if coagulation was poor. Infection could develop in the cut, leading to abscess, sepsis, or even death. Fainting during the procedure was frequent, attributed to the removal of diseased humour rather than to blood loss and shock. Repeated bloodletting could lead to anemia, though this was not recognised as a treatment complication. Cupping was an alternative method of removing blood, used when veins were difficult to access or when the patient preferred this method. The procedure involved creating small cuts or scratches on the skin's surface, then placing a heated cup over the area. As the air in the cup cooled, it created partial vacuum that drew blood from the cuts into the cup. The cups would remain in place until filled with blood, or until the physician judged sufficient blood had been removed. Leeching was another bloodletting method. Medicinal leeches, Hirudo medicinalis, would be applied to the skin where they would attach and begin feeding. Each leech would consume several milliliters of blood over the course of 20 to 30 minutes. Multiple leeches could be used for larger blood removals. The advantage of leeching was that it required no cutting, and the leeches would detach naturally when satiated. The preparation of leeches involved keeping them in clean water and ensuring they were hungry before application. Starved leeches attached readily and fed eagerly. They would be placed on shaved skin in the area to be treated. The leech's bite created a Y-shaped wound that would continue bleeding after the leech detached, sometimes for hours, providing additional blood removal beyond what the leech consumed. The timing of bloodletting was as important as the method. Astrological considerations, already discussed, governed when bleeding should occur. Additionally, seasonal variations were recognized. Spring bloodletting was preventative, clearing excess blood humor that accumulated during winter. Full bloodletting prepared the body for winter. Bleeding in summer or winter was only for acute illness, not routine prevention. The frequency of bloodletting varied by individual and medical tradition. Some practitioners recommended bloodletting several times per year as preventative care. Others bled only when illness appeared. Some patients demanded frequent bleeding, believing it maintained health. Others resisted and complied only when illness was severe. The physician's judgment about optimal bleeding frequency balanced traditional guidelines with patient preference and apparent results. Purging complemented bloodletting by removing excess bile humours through the digestive tract. Emetics induced vomiting to clear yellow bile from the stomach. Various substances served as emetics. Ipecac root, derived from a South American plant, was particularly effective. White hellebore root also induced powerful vomiting. These substances would be prepared as teas or powders mixed with water. The patient would drink the emetic mixture and then would wait for the inevitable vomiting to begin. The vomiting would be copious and distressing. The patient would void stomach contents repeatedly until nothing remained but bile-stained fluid. This was considered therapeutic. The bile being expelled was diseased humour that needed removal. The patient would be advised to rest afterward, recovering from the physical stress of repeated vomiting. Laxatives and purgatives induced diarrhea to clear bile from the intestines. Senna, rhubarb root, and cascara sagrada were common purgatives. Stronger effects could be achieved with calomel, mercurous chloride, though mercury poisoning from calomel was a significant risk. The purgative would be administered as tea, pills, or powder. Within hours, intestinal cramping would begin, followed by diarrhea that would continue for hours. The severity of purging could be extreme. Patients might have 20 or more bowel movements in a day of purging treatment. The fluid and electrolyte losses could be dangerous, though this was not recognized. The exhaustion, cramping, and general misery of purging were considered signs that the treatment was working. The body was being cleansed of diseased humours through this violent expulsion. Combining bloodletting and purging was common for serious illnesses. The patient would be bled, purged, bled again, purged again, in cycles that continued for days or weeks. Each intervention was believed to remove diseased humours and restore balance. That patients often died during such aggressive treatment was attributed to the severity of the disease rather than to the treatment itself. Survivors recovered despite the treatment, not because of it, though physicians claimed credit for the cure. Chapter 8. Theriac and Universal Remedies. The search for panaceas, universal cures that could treat all diseases, occupied medical thought throughout history. The most famous of these supposed cure-alls was theriac, also called Venice treacle, a complex compound that was produced for more than 1,500 years and was believed to cure virtually any ailment. Theriac originated in ancient Greece as an antidote to poison and snake bite. The physician Andromachus, doctor to Emperor Nero, developed a formula containing more than 60 ingredients. The recipe was refined over centuries, with some versions containing more than 100 components. The ingredients included medicinal herbs, minerals, exotic animal parts, and most famously, viper flesh. The preparation of theriac was elaborate and public. In cities like Venice that produced theriac commercially, the compounding would be performed in public squares before assembled crowds and officials who verified that genuine ingredients were used. The ingredients would be displayed, identified, weighed, and combined according to the traditional recipe. This public ceremony ensured quality and enhanced the product's reputation. The ingredients were exotic and expensive. From the plant world, opium, myrrh, frankincense, ginger, cinnamon, pepper, and dozens of other herbs and spices. From minerals, various earths and metals. From animals, viper flesh, scorpions, and other creatures whose venoms were supposedly neutralized by proper preparation. Some ingredients came from great distances. Spices from India, resins from Arabia, minerals from mines across Europe and Asia. The vipers used in theriac required special preparation. They would be captured alive, typically in spring when they emerge from hibernation. They would be kept until needed, then killed and gutted. The bodies would be cooked to separate flesh from bones. The flesh would be dried and ground to powder. This viper powder was considered essential to theriac's effectiveness. The logic was that the poison of the viper, properly prepared, could counteract all other poisons and venoms. The compounding process took weeks. Dry ingredients would be ground to powder individually. Wet ingredients would be prepared appropriately. Opium dissolved in wine, resins melted, animal parts rendered. The powders would be mixed in precise proportions according to the recipe. The mixture would be combined with honey to form a paste, or with wine to create a liquid preparation. The result would be aged, sometimes for years, to allow the ingredients to mature and combine their virtues. The finished theriac was thick, dark, and intensely flavoured, sweet from honey, bitter from herbs, complex from the multitude of ingredients. A dose would be perhaps a spoonful dissolved in wine or water. Larger doses were used for severe conditions. The taste was generally unpleasant, but medicines were expected to taste bad. Pleasant-tasting substances were suspect as medicines. Effective remedies should assault the palate as they assaulted disease. Theriac was prescribed for an astonishing range of conditions. Poisonings of all types. Theriac could neutralize any toxin. Plague. Theriac protected against and cured this dreaded disease. Fevers. Theriac reduced heat and restored balance. Headaches, stomach aches, weakness, coughs, pain, all supposedly responded to theriac. The universal application made it invaluable to physicians who could prescribe theriac regardless of diagnosis. The cost of theriac was high, reflecting its complex ingredients and elaborate preparation. Only the wealthy could afford regular use. However, theriac's reputation meant that even people of moderate means might purchase small amounts during plague epidemics or serious illness. Rulers and nobility maintained supplies of theriac. The rich gave theriac as valuable gifts. Its expense contributed to its prestige. Surely something so costly must be effective. Mithridatium was theriac's predecessor and rival. Named for King Mithridates VI of Pontus, who supposedly made himself immune to poison through gradual exposure. This compound was simpler than theriac but followed similar principles. It contained fewer ingredients, typically around 50, and lacked viper flesh. It was less expensive and more widely available than theriac, but was considered less powerful. Bezoar stones were another supposed universal remedy. These were concretions found in the digestive systems of ruminant animals, particularly goats and gazelles. The stones formed around swallowed material that could not be digested, gradually accumulating layers. Bezoar stones were believed to detect and neutralize poison. A stone placed in poisoned liquid would supposedly sweat or change color. Powdered bezoar consumed would cure poisoning. The belief in bezoar stones was strong enough that they were set in gold and kept as precious objects. A nobleman might wear a bezoar in a pendant or keep one in an ornate box. When poison was suspected, the stone would be retrieved and used. The limited supply of genuine bezoar stones and high demand led to fakes, stones manufactured from various materials and passed off as genuine bezoars. Unicorn horn was another prized universal remedy, though of course genuine unicorn horn did not exist. What was sold as unicorn horn was typically narwhal tusk, carved fossil ivory, or antelope horn. Like bezoar, it supposedly detected and neutralized poison. Shavings from the horn would be dissolved in wine and consumed. Touching the horn to food or drink would reveal poison by causing bubbling or discoloration. The value of supposed unicorn horn was extraordinary. A single horn might cost more than a king's ransom. Rulers and the wealthy competed to acquire horns. Tests were devised to verify authenticity. Scorpions placed near the horn would supposedly die, demonstrating its power. That these tests failed to reliably distinguish narwhal tusk from other materials did not diminish belief in unicorn horn's virtue. Gold itself was considered medicinal. Gold leaf could be consumed in food or drink. Gold dissolved in acid could be prepared as a medicine. The incorruptibility of gold, it does not rust or decay, was thought to transfer to consumers, preventing corruption of the body and promoting longevity. Potable gold solutions were expensive and dangerous, as the acids and mercury used to dissolve gold were toxic. Panacea theories reflected deeper beliefs about unity of disease and cure. If all diseases resulted from humoral imbalance, then a substance that perfectly balanced humours would cure all disease. If poison was the root of illness, then universal antidotes would be universal cures. These theories seemed logical within their frameworks, even though they were entirely wrong about disease causation and treatment. The persistence of belief in panaceas despite clear evidence of failure is psychologically interesting. Patients who took theriac and died were considered too far gone or too weak. Those who recovered were cured by theriac. The confirmation bias was overwhelming. Expensive, elaborate preparations seemed more likely to work than simple remedies. The investment in these substances, financial, emotional, traditional, made abandoning them difficult. The decline of panacea belief paralleled the development of scientific medicine. As specific disease causes were identified, the idea of universal cures became untenable. Different diseases required different treatments targeting specific pathogens or dysfunctions. The last production of theriac by European apothecaries occurred in the early 20th century, long after the medical profession had abandoned it, but continued by tradition for customers who requested it. Conclusion: the long shadow of misunderstanding. And so we reach the conclusion of this exhaustive, deliberately tedious examination of how people historically thought magic and medicine worked. We have explored the theory of four humours with its complex system of bodily fluids and qualities. We have examined the doctrine of signatures with its belief that plants bore signs of their medical uses. We have investigated astrological medicine with its connections between celestial bodies and human health. We have detailed sympathetic magic and its principles of contagion and similarity. We have catalogued the supposed power of words and incantations. We have surveyed the vast array of amulets and protective objects that people carried. We have described bloodletting practices and humoral balancing. We have concluded with theriac and the pursuit of universal remedies. What emerges from this comprehensive examination is a picture of persistent, profound misunderstanding. For centuries, millennia even, humans approached health and healing with theories that were completely wrong. The four humours did not exist. Signatures in plants indicated nothing about medical uses. Celestial bodies did not influence health. Sympathetic connections were imaginary. Words possessed no intrinsic healing power. Amulets did not protect. Bloodletting rarely helped and often harmed. Theriac was ineffective despite its complexity. Yet people believed these things with deep conviction. Physicians trained for years in humoral theory. Patients submitted to bloodletting and purging. People wore amulets, spoke incantations, consulted astrologers, and purchased theriac. These practices were integrated into daily life, into professional medical treatment, into religious observance. They were not fringe beliefs, but mainstream, dominant understandings of how the world worked. This persistence, despite failure, reveals several important patterns. First, pre-scientific medicine lacked effective treatments for most conditions. Without antibiotics, surgery, or understanding of disease mechanisms, most serious illnesses either resolved on their own or proved fatal regardless of treatment. This meant that treatments could not be clearly judged effective or ineffective. Recovery happened sometimes, death happened sometimes, and attributing either to specific treatments was difficult. Second, the theoretical frameworks supporting these beliefs were internally consistent and philosophically sophisticated. Humoral theory fit within broader ancient and medieval philosophy about elements, qualities, and the structure of the cosmos. Astrological medicine connected to astronomy and mathematics. Sympathetic magic aligned with beliefs about spiritual forces and divine order. These were not random superstitions, but systematic worldviews that made sense within their own terms. Third, these beliefs served psychological and social functions beyond their stated medical purposes. Amulets provided comfort and sense of control. Incantations gave people something to do when facing illness. Complex preparations like theriac demonstrated wealth and access. Medical rituals provided structure for dealing with the anxiety of disease. These functions meant that practices persisted even when effectiveness was doubtful. Fourth, the lack of systematic testing and the absence of scientific method meant that mistaken beliefs could perpetuate indefinitely. Apparent successes confirmed beliefs. Failures were explained away. No controlled comparison between treatments occurred. No statistical analysis evaluated outcomes. Tradition and authority determined medical practice rather than evidence. The transition to scientific medicine was gradual and uneven. The rejection of one set of beliefs did not immediately produce better alternatives. Early scientific medicine was often as ineffective as what it replaced. Effective treatments based on understanding of disease mechanisms emerged slowly. Antisepsis in surgery, vaccination for infectious disease, pharmaceutical drugs targeting specific pathways. Only in the late 19th and 20th centuries did medicine become consistently more helpful than harmful. Yet remnants of historical beliefs persist. Alternative medicine often draws on humoral concepts, astrological thinking, signature doctrine, and energy flows resembling sympathetic magic. People still wear crystals for healing, consult astrological health guidance, use homeopathy based on similarity principles. These practices no longer dominate but retain cultural presence and individual adherence. Understanding this history provides perspective on human knowledge and progress. The certainty with which people held false beliefs should make us humble about current knowledge. Scientific medicine has achieved remarkable successes, but future generations will likely view some current practices as misguided as we view bloodletting. The importance of empirical testing, systematic evaluation, and willingness to abandon disproven theories is clear. This history also shows the resilience of human hope. Faced with disease, suffering, and death, people sought explanations and remedies. The theories were wrong, the treatments ineffective or harmful, but the impulse to understand and to heal was genuine. The elaborate systems developed, humoral medicine, astrological diagnosis, sympathetic magic, represented serious attempts to make sense of health and illness within available conceptual frameworks. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps reflect on these long-abandoned beliefs. Imagine physicians carefully bleeding patients according to moon phases. Picture apothecaries, compounding theriac from dozens of exotic ingredients. Envision people wearing amulets, reciting incantations, studying signatures in plants. These activities occupied human time and energy for centuries, pursued with conviction that has now entirely evaporated. The detailed examination of these beliefs, their logic, their practices, their persistence, has been deliberately tedious because the reality was tedious. Medical practice consisted largely of repetitive procedures based on flawed theory. Patients endured treatments that were at best useless and often actively harmful. Physicians studied texts filled with incorrect information. The actual experience of historical medicine, stripped of romantic nostalgia, was boring in its repetitive ineffectiveness. Sleep now, your mind filled with images of bleeding basins and leech jars, with visions of astrological charts and humoral diagrams, with thoughts of amulets and incantations. Let these outdated beliefs, described in exhaustive and sleep-inducing detail, carry you into unconsciousness. Tomorrow you can appreciate modern medicine's evidence-based practices. But tonight, in the liminal space before sleep, you can contemplate centuries of well-intentioned but profoundly misguided attempts to understand how healing worked. May your dreams be free from bloodletting and purging. May you sleep undisturbed by humoral imbalances. May no astrological configurations trouble your rest, and may you wake refreshed, grateful to live in an era when medicine, for all its remaining imperfections, is vastly superior to the long centuries of theory unmoored from evidence, practice untested by experiment, and belief unsupported by fact. Good night. Chapter 9. Miasma Theory and Bad Air. For much of history, people believed that diseases were caused by miasma, bad air arising from rotting organic matter, stagnant water, or other sources of foul odours. This theory seemed to explain why diseases clustered in certain locations, and why some places were healthier than others. The miasma theory influenced medicine and public health for centuries before being displaced by germ theory. The fundamental principle was simple. Bad smells indicated dangerous air that could cause disease. Swamps, sewers, garbage heaps, battlefields with unburied dead, overcrowded slums, all produced foul odours and all were associated with disease. The connection seemed obvious. The bad air itself was sickening people who breathed it. Avoiding bad smells meant avoiding disease. Physicians recommended various measures to protect against miasma. Wearing sachets of aromatic herbs, lavender, rosemary, thyme, would overpower the dangerous odours and protect the wearer. Vinegar-soaked cloths held over the nose filtered bad air. Burning aromatic substances, incense, aromatic woods, herbs, purified the air in rooms and homes, making them safe to inhabit. The plague doctor's mask with its long bird-like beak was designed for miasma protection. The beak contained aromatic herbs and substances intended to purify the air before the physician breathed it. The physician could approach plague victims without inhaling dangerous miasma because the mask filtered the air. This protection was entirely psychological. The mask did nothing to prevent disease transmission, but it allowed physicians to feel safe enough to treat patients. Urban planning was influenced by miasma theory. Cities should have broad streets allowing air circulation to prevent stagnant miasma accumulation. Buildings should be constructed to maximize ventilation. Swamps should be drained, as their stagnant water produced disease-causing vapors. Garbage and waste should be removed regularly to prevent miasma generation. These measures sometimes improved public health, though not for the reasons believers thought. The location of hospitals and medical facilities was determined partly by miasma considerations. They should be on hills or elevated locations where air circulated freely rather than in valleys where miasma pooled. They should be away from swamps, cemeteries, and other miasma sources. Windows should be positioned to maximize airflow, preventing miasma concentration inside buildings. Seasonal variations in disease were explained through miasma. Summer heat caused increased putrefaction, generating more miasma and explaining why diseases like cholera and dysentery were more common in warm months. Fall miasma from decaying vegetation explained autumn fevers. Spring flooding created stagnant water and miasma, causing spring illnesses. The seasonal pattern of disease seemed to confirm miasma theory. The treatment of miasma-caused diseases involved purifying the patient's internal air and humours. Fresh air was important. Patients should be moved to well-ventilated locations. Aromatic medicines helped purify internal miasma. Bloodletting and purging removed miasma-corrupted humours. The treatments combined miasma theory with humoral theory in integrated frameworks. Preventive measures against miasma included lifestyle modifications, living in clean, well-ventilated homes with gardens and fresh air reduced exposure, avoiding marshy areas, crowded slums, and other miasma sources protected health. Diet rich in fresh foods rather than decayed materials maintained internal purity. Regular exercise promoted air circulation through the body, preventing internal miasma accumulation. The persistence of miasma theory was supported by superficial correlations. Places that smelled bad often were unhealthy, though the real causes were contaminated water, poor sanitation, and crowding rather than bad air itself. Interventions based on miasma theory sometimes worked, though because they improved sanitation and reduced crowding rather than because they eliminated miasma. The transition from miasma to germ theory was gradual. Early germ theorists like John Snow, who traced cholera to contaminated water rather than miasma, faced skepticism from miasma adherents. The discovery of bacteria and their role in disease had to accumulate extensive evidence before medical consensus shifted. Even after germ theory was established, some practitioners continued to hold miasma beliefs, or tried to reconcile the theories. Elements of miasma thinking persist in folk beliefs about night air being dangerous, about the importance of fresh air for health, about connections between bad smells and disease. While the specific miasma theory is dead, intuitions about air quality and health continue, now with better scientific understanding of actual air pollutants and respiratory disease transmission. Conclusion: the long shadow of misunderstanding. Rest of previous conclusion text continues as before. Chapter 10. The Theory of Vital Force Anta. 10. The Theory of Vital Force and Animal Magnetism. The 18th and 19th centuries saw the development of theories about invisible forces and energies that supposedly governed health and healing. These theories represented attempts to explain phenomena that were not well understood using concepts that seemed scientific but were actually unfounded speculation. Vitalism held that living organisms possessed a special vital force, or life energy, distinct from ordinary physical and chemical processes. This vital force animated living matter and distinguished it from dead matter. Disease resulted from disturbances in vital force. Healing involved restoring proper flow and balance of this force. The theory seemed to explain why living things behave differently from non-living matter. Various names were given to this vital force across different traditions and time periods. The Chinese concept of qi or qi represented life energy flowing through meridians in the body. Indian Ayurvedic medicine spoke of prana. European vitalists called it vital force, life force, or elan vital. Despite different names and cultural contexts, the basic concept was similar: an invisible energy that made life possible. The measurement and manipulation of vital force became major concerns for practitioners. Some claimed they could feel vital force in themselves or others. Diagnosis involved assessing the quantity and quality of a patient's vital force. Treatment aimed to strengthen weak vital force, redirect blocked vital force, or balance excess vital force. Various techniques were developed for these purposes. Animal magnetism, proposed by Franz Mesmer in the late 18th century, was a specific theory about vital force. Mesmer claimed that a magnetic fluid filled the universe and flowed through all living things. Health depended on proper flow of this magnetic fluid through the body. Illness resulted from blockages or imbalances in the fluid. Treatment involved manipulating the magnetic fluid to restore proper flow. Mesmer's therapeutic technique involved having patients sit around a bouquet, a wooden tub filled with water, iron filings, and glass. Iron rods protruded from the bouquet, and patients would hold these rods or apply them to afflicted body parts. Mesmer would then make passes with his hands over and around the patients, supposedly directing magnetic fluid flow. Patients would enter crisis states, convulsions, fainting, intense emotional experiences, which Mesmer interpreted as the magnetic fluid breaking through blockages. The spectacular nature of mesmeric treatments attracted attention. Patients and audiences reported dramatic experiences and sometimes claimed cures of various ailments. Public demonstrations showed people in apparent trances following Mesmer's directions. The theatrical quality made animal magnetism popular entertainment, as well as supposed medical treatment. Investigation of animal magnetism by scientific commissions found no evidence for the magnetic fluid. A royal commission in France in 1784, including Benjamin Franklin and the chemist Lavoisier, concluded that effects attributed to animal magnetism were due to imagination rather than any physical fluid. Despite this scientific rejection, animal magnetism continued to have adherents and influence later developments in hypnosis and psychotherapy. The concept of bodily electricity also emerged during this period. Luigi Galvani's experiments showing that electrical current could cause muscle contractions in dead frogs suggested that electricity was the vital force. Practitioners developed electrical healing devices that supposedly restored vital force through electrical stimulation. These devices range from simple batteries to complex machines with multiple electrodes and controls. Electrical healing became a significant industry. Practitioners offered electrical treatments for numerous conditions. Advertisements claimed that electrical stimulation could cure paralysis, weakness, nerve disorders, and various other ailments. The treatments involved applying electrodes to various body parts and passing electrical current through the patient. The shocks and muscle contractions produced were interpreted as therapeutic effects. Water cure or hydropathy was another vital force-related practice. Cold water supposedly stimulated vital force, strengthening the body and promoting health. Treatments involved cold baths, wet sheet wraps, drinking large quantities of water, and various other water-based interventions. Hydropathic establishments offered weeks-long treatment courses where patients underwent multiple daily water treatments. The practices associated with vital force theories were sometimes harmless and occasionally beneficial through non-specific effects like relaxation or increased attention to health. However, they also led to neglect of effective treatments, exploitation of desperate patients, and sometimes direct harm from poorly conducted electrical or water treatments. The decline of vital force theories came as biochemistry and physiology revealed that life processes could be explained through chemistry and physics without invoking special vital forces. The discovery that organic compounds could be synthesized from inorganic materials contradicted vitalist claims about fundamental distinctions between living and non-living matter. Modern biology has no need for vital force concepts to explain living processes, yet vital force ideas persist in alternative medicine. Acupuncture based on QE, Reiki claiming to manipulate universal life force, various energy healing practices, all echo historical vital force theories. These practices enjoy popularity despite lack of scientific evidence for the proposed energy or mechanisms. The appeal of invisible vital forces as explanations for health and healing continues. Chapter 11. Homeopathy and the Law of Similars. Homeopathy, developed by Samuel Hahnemann in the late 18th century, represented a systematic medical theory based on principles that contradicted both contemporary medicine and subsequent scientific understanding, yet it achieved widespread acceptance and continues to have adherents despite overwhelming evidence of ineffectiveness. The fundamental principle of homeopathy is the law of similars, like cures like. Substances that cause symptoms in healthy people will cure those same symptoms in sick people. This principle was derived from Hahnemann's observation that cinchona bark, which treats malaria, also causes fever-like symptoms when taken by healthy people. He generalized this observation into a universal principle. The process of creating homeopathic remedies involved serial dilution and succussion, vigorous shaking. A substance would be dissolved in water or alcohol, then one part of the solution would be mixed with 99 parts of pure solvent. This 1:100 dilution would be succussed vigorously. Then one part of this diluted solution would be diluted again 1:100 and succussed. This process would repeat 30 times or more. The mathematics of such dilution is staggering. A 30C dilution, diluted 1:130 times, represents dilution of 1 in 10 to the power of 60. This is far beyond the point where any molecules of the original substance remain. A 30C dilution of a substance in the Atlantic Ocean would mean less than 1 molecule of the original substance in the entire ocean. Yet homeopaths claimed these extremely diluted solutions were most potent. Hahnemann explained this paradox through the concept of dynamization. The succussion process supposedly imparted the spirit-like essence of the substance to the water. The more diluted and succussed, the more potent this essence became. Physical substance was less important than this immaterial vital force transferred to the water. This explanation required accepting that water could retain memory of substances no longer present. Homeopathic proving was the method for determining which substances treated which conditions. Healthy volunteers would take substances and record all symptoms experienced. These symptoms, however minor or unrelated they seemed, indicated what conditions the substance would treat. A substance causing headache in healthy people would treat headaches. One causing stomach upset would treat digestive problems. The provings produced vast repertories cataloguing thousands of symptoms and the remedies supposedly treating them. These repertories became reference works that homeopaths consulted when treating patients. The patient's symptoms would be matched to remedy symptoms from provings, and the matching remedy would be prescribed. Homeopathic consultation was remarkably detailed. Practitioners would spend hours questioning patients about symptoms, not just primary complaints, but any sensation, mood change, preference, or experience. The total symptom picture guided remedy selection. Two patients with the same disease might receive different remedies if their complete symptom pictures differed. The remedies themselves were usually pills made from milk sugar impregnated with the diluted solution. The pills looked and tasted the same regardless of the purported remedy. They were just sugar pills. The only difference was which substance had supposedly been diluted into non-existence to create the solution used to wet the sugar. Patients taking these remedies were consuming only sugar with perhaps trace contamination. Despite the implausibility and the absence of active ingredients in homeopathic remedies, the practice achieved considerable success and respectability. Homeopathic hospitals were established. Homeopaths treated wealthy and influential patients. Homeopathic pharmacies sold remedies. The practice was taught in medical schools. This success had multiple explanations unrelated to remedy effectiveness. First, homeopathy arose when conventional medicine was actively harmful. Bloodletting, harsh purges, toxic mercury treatments, conventional medical interventions often worsened patient outcomes. Homeopathy's sugar pills, being inert, at least did no harm. Patients treated homeopathically often fared better than those subjected to conventional treatments, not because homeopathy worked, but because conventional medicine actively harmed. Second, homeopathic consultations provided attention and care. The detailed questioning, the individualized treatment, the ongoing relationship with a practitioner, these addressed patients' emotional needs. The therapeutic relationship and belief in treatment produced placebo effects that sometimes appeared as improvement. Third, many conditions improve on their own. Patients taking homeopathic remedies would sometimes recover because the disease ran its natural course, not because the remedy helped. The temporal association between remedy and recovery was mistaken for causal connection. Homeopaths credited their remedies with cures that would have occurred without treatment. Scientific testing of homeopathy has consistently shown that highly diluted remedies perform no better than placebo when patients do not know whether they received homeopathic remedy or inert placebo. No difference in outcomes appears. The remedies work only when patients know they are taking them and believe they will work. Classic placebo effects. The mechanism proposed for homeopathy, water memory, dynamization, law of similars, contradicts established physics, chemistry, and biology. Water does not retain memory of dissolved substances. Diluting substances does not increase potency. Like does not cure like as a general principle. The theoretical foundation is nonsense dressed in pseudo-scientific language. Yet homeopathy persists. Homeopathic remedies are sold in pharmacies alongside real medicines. Some governments regulate homeopathic products as medicines despite lack of evidence. Patients continue to seek homeopathic treatment, attracted by promises of gentle, natural healing without side effects. The practice thrives on scientific illiteracy and on the appeal of alternatives to conventional medicine. The history of homeopathy illustrates how medical systems based entirely on incorrect principles can nonetheless gain acceptance and persist for centuries. Internal consistency of theory, dedicated practitioners, satisfied patients, and cultural acceptance can sustain practices that scientific investigation shows to be no more effective than placebo. Chapter 12. Folk Medicine. Practices and Superstitions. Beyond organized medical systems, folk medicine practices passed down through oral tradition represented another category of historical healing beliefs. These practices varied by region and culture, but shared common features of mixing practical remedies, superstitious rituals, and symbolic actions. The application of spider webs to wounds to stop bleeding was widespread folk practice. Spider silk actually has some antimicrobial properties and provides a scaffold for clotting, so this practice occasionally helped. However, folk belief attributed effectiveness to the spider's nature rather than silk properties. Some traditions required speaking charms while applying the web or applying it in specific ways for effectiveness. Urine was used medicinally in various folk traditions. Drinking one's own urine supposedly promoted health and cured various ailments. Urine compresses were applied to wounds and skin conditions. The practice rested on beliefs that urine contained vital essences from the body that could be recycled for healing. Modern understanding recognizes urine as waste product, whose medicinal use is unfounded. Wearing copper bracelets for arthritis pain is a folk practice persisting today. The belief is that copper absorbed through skin reduces inflammation and pain. Scientific testing shows no benefit beyond placebo. Yet copper bracelet sales continue, and wearers report subjective improvement regardless of objective measurements showing no effect. Moon phase timing affected various folk medicine practices beyond those mentioned earlier. Wounds healed faster if treated during waxing moon. Surgery should occur during waning moon to minimize bleeding. Medicine gathering, remedy preparation, even visits to healers were timed by moon phases. These timing requirements added complexity and ritual element to treatments. The seventh son of a seventh son was believed to have healing powers in various European folk traditions. Such a person could cure diseases through touch or through specially prepared remedies. Patients would seek out these rare individuals for healing. The belief had no rational basis but created a special category of folk healers with supposed inherent powers. Measuring with thread to diagnose disease appeared in various traditions. Thread would be measured against the patient's body. Then this measured thread would show whether the person was cursed or diseased based on how it behaved when tested over fire or water. The practice combined sympathetic magic with diagnostic procedure. Passing children through split trees or through specially shaped stones supposedly cured diseases, particularly hernias and rickets. The child would be passed through the opening, which symbolically represented passage from disease to healthy state. The tree or stone's power transferred to the child, healing the condition. Some locations became pilgrimage sites for these healing passages. touching relics of executed criminals was believed to have healing power. The Hand of Glory mentioned earlier was one example. Touching gallows wood, nooses, or even the criminals' bodies themselves supposedly transferred power from the liminal state of criminal execution. This power could heal ailments through its connection to death and transformation. Burying or drowning objects to cure corresponding conditions was common folk practice. Warts could be cured by rubbing them with meat, then burying the meat. As the meat decayed, warts would disappear. Fever could be transferred to a tree by tying a thread around it and leaving it there. The disease would transfer to the object or tree and dissipate. First Communion hosts kept and used medicinally represented syncretism of Christian practice and folk healing. The consecrated host was believed to have special power that could cure illness when consumed or placed on afflicted body parts. This practice was forbidden by church authorities but continued in folk practice. Turning patients in bed to face different directions supposedly affected recovery. The direction patient faced influenced how disease progressed. Facing east promoted recovery through connection to sunrise and new beginning. Facing west meant decline toward death and sunset. This belief influenced nursing care and room arrangement. Cutting hair and nails on specific days of the week had health implications in folk belief. Cutting on some days promoted health and growth. Cutting on other days invited illness or bad luck. Complex rules governed when grooming was safe and when it was dangerous. These rules varied by tradition but shared the assumption that timing affected outcomes. Wearing colours affected health in folk belief. Red promoted strength and vitality. Green promoted healing. Black absorbed illness. White promoted purity. Sick people might be dressed in specific colours to promote recovery or to prevent disease worsening. Colour choice in clothing became medical decision. These folk practices, while mostly ineffective, served important social and psychological functions. They provided something to do when facing illness, giving sense of control and hope. They embodied cultural knowledge and tradition, connecting people to their ancestors and communities. They were accessible to common people without need for expensive medicines or professional practitioners. The persistence of folk medicine practices alongside scientific medicine shows the enduring appeal of traditional healing. Even when people have access to effective modern medicine, they may also use folk remedies, both simultaneously. The folk practices provide cultural connection and personal agency that clinical medicine sometimes lacks. Modern investigation occasionally finds that some folk remedies have actual efficacy. Aspirin derived from willow bark used in folk medicine. Digitalis from foxglove used to treat dropsy. Quinine from cinchona bark used for fever. These successes were exceptions, however. Most folk remedies had no active benefit beyond placebo effects and social support. The distinction between harmless folk practices and dangerous medical interventions is important. Wearing copper bracelets or eating chicken soup when sick causes no harm and may provide comfort. Rejecting proven treatments in favour of folk remedies can be lethal. The challenge is supporting beneficial aspects of folk medicine while preventing harmful rejection of effective treatments. Conclusion: patterns in historical medical belief. Previous conclusion continues with modifications to acknowledge additional chapters. This comprehensive examination has revealed persistent patterns in how humans developed and maintained incorrect beliefs about healing. The theories seem absurd from our current perspective, but they represented serious attempts to understand health within available conceptual frameworks. The elaborate systems developed, humoral theory, astrological medicine, vital forces, homeopathy, folk practices, show human creativity applied to the fundamental problem of disease and healing. The transition to scientific medicine involved not just new discoveries, but fundamental changes in how medical knowledge was validated. Authority and tradition were replaced by experimental testing. Anecdote was replaced by systematic data collection. Plausible-sounding theories were subjected to empirical verification. This methodological revolution was as important as any specific discovery. Yet we should be humble about current medical knowledge. Future generations will likely view some current practices and beliefs as mistaken as we view bloodletting. Medical science continues to evolve, and what seems certain today may be revised tomorrow. The history of medical error teaches the importance of ongoing questioning, testing, and willingness to abandon disproven ideas. Sleep now, your mind saturated with centuries of medical misconception. May your rest be peaceful, and your dreams free from the ministrations of historical healers. Good night. The exhaustive examination of these historical beliefs has been deliberately tedious, because the reality was tedious. Medical practice for most of history consisted of repetitive procedures based on flawed theories, applied to patients who often died regardless of treatment. Physicians spent careers learning elaborate systems that were fundamentally wrong. Patients endured treatments ranging from useless to actively harmful, sustained by hope and lack of alternatives. The social structures supporting these beliefs were powerful. Medical guilds controlled who could practice. Universities taught traditional theories. Published texts codified practices. Legal systems recognized certain treatments as legitimate. Religious institutions blessed healing rituals. Economic interests profited from medicines and procedures. These interlocking systems made change difficult even when evidence contradicted established practice. The psychological investment in these beliefs should not be underestimated. Physicians who had spent decades learning humoral theory could not easily abandon it. Patients who had been bled or purged for years had to believe the treatments helped to make sense of their suffering. Cultures that had practiced folk remedies for generations preserved them as treasured wisdom. Admitting that cherished beliefs were wrong required confronting uncomfortable truths. The diversity of healing beliefs across cultures shows both universal human concerns and culturally specific elaborations. Every culture developed explanations for disease and methods for healing. The specific theories varied enormously. Yin and yang in China, doshas in India, humours in Europe, but all attempted to explain the same biological realities of illness and health. The cultural packaging differed while the underlying questions remained constant. The integration of magic and medicine in historical practice reflected broader worldviews where natural and supernatural were not sharply distinguished. Herbal remedies might be combined with incantations. Physical treatments might be timed astrologically. Prayers might accompany surgery. The holistic approach mixed what we now separate into natural and supernatural, empirical and spiritual, physical and psychological. Modern scientific medicine's success in replacing these historical practices was gradual and uneven. The germ theory revolution of the late 19th century provided correct understanding of infectious disease. Antiseptic techniques reduced surgical mortality. Vaccination prevented diseases. Antibiotics cured infections. These successes accumulated, demonstrating that scientific approaches worked better than traditional ones. Yet the transition was resisted. Traditional practitioners defended their theories and methods. Patients sometimes preferred familiar treatments to new scientific ones. Cultural and religious objections slowed acceptance of innovations like vaccination. Economic interests in traditional medicines opposed scientific alternatives. The replacement of historical medical beliefs required not just scientific progress, but social and cultural change. The persistence of alternative medicine today, often based on historical theories like vitalism, humoral concepts, or energy healing, shows that transition from traditional to scientific medicine remains incomplete. People continue to seek treatments based on disproven theories, attracted by promises of natural healing, by distrust of scientific medicine, by cultural tradition, or by desperation when conventional medicine offers no cure. Understanding this history provides perspective on ongoing debates about medical practice. The historical pattern of ineffective treatments being defended against evidence-based alternatives continues in modern form. The psychological needs that historical medicine addressed, providing hope, offering explanation, giving sense of control, remain important. Modern medicine's challenge is providing effective treatment while also meeting these psychological and social needs. As this exhaustively detailed, deliberately boring examination of historical medical beliefs finally concludes, perhaps you can now rest peacefully. Your mind, filled to overflowing with incorrect humoral theory, impossible signature doctrine, fictional astrological influences, imaginary sympathetic connections, powerless word magic, ineffective amulets, harmful, bloodletting, useless panaceas, non-existent miasmas, imaginary vital forces, absurd homeopathic dilutions, and superstitious folk practices should find sleep a welcome escape from this relentless catalogue of human error in attempting to understand healing. Sleep deeply and well, grateful to live in an era when medicine, while imperfect, is vastly superior to the long millennia of confident ignorance that preceded it. Good night. May your dreams be untroubled by the bloodletting physicians, the astrological calculators, the charm-muttering healers, and the confident purveyors of useless remedies who populated medical history. May you rest easy knowing that the exhaustive catalogue of errors you have endured reading about represents closed chapters in human attempts to understand health, and may the profound tedium of this examination have served its purpose of inducing the peaceful sleep that no amount of theriac, no placement of amulets, no balancing of humours, and no manipulation of vital forces could ever achieve. Good night and sleep well in the certainty that tomorrow's medicine, for all its remaining mysteries, rests on foundations infinitely more solid than the elaborate castles of error that dominated healing for so very, very long. Rest peacefully now,